Beneath the quiet stone floors of Europe's ancient abbeys, a secret world lies hidden, one that holds the power to rewrite history itself. Picture this: a monk in the flickering candlelight, carefully lowering a forbidden manuscript through a trapdoor, burying it beneath the very ground where his brothers kneel in prayer. These clandestine libraries weren't just collections of books. They were time capsules of radical ideas, smuggled knowledge, and truths too dangerous to be seen. For centuries, these underground vaults preserved writings that challenged empires, sparked revolutions, and kept the flame of learning alive during the darkest ages. And today, we're going to uncover their stories. Think about the sheer audacity it took to hide an entire library beneath the feet of those who sought to destroy it. These weren't just storage rooms, they were acts of defiance. When wars raged and invaders burned books, when rulers banned certain texts, these secret chambers became sanctuaries for knowledge. The monks who built them risked everything, knowing that if discovered, they could face imprisonment or worse. Yet they did it anyway because they understood something profound: ideas are indestructible. Even when buried, they have a way of resurfacing, of changing the world in ways no one could predict. What makes these hidden libraries so extraordinary isn't just their cunning construction or the treasures they held, it's the legacy they left behind. Without them, we might have lost entire philosophies, scientific breakthroughs, and literary masterpieces forever. Imagine a world where the works of ancient thinkers never made it out of the Middle Ages, where entire schools of thought vanished because no one dared to protect them. That's the alternate history we narrowly avoided, thanks to the bravery of those who built these secret archives. So join me as we descend into the shadows, peeling back layers of time to reveal how these underground libraries didn't just preserve the past, they shaped the future in ways we're still discovering today. To understand why monks would go to such extraordinary lengths to hide their libraries, we have to step back into the early medieval world, a time when books were rare, fragile, and irreplaceable. Monasteries like Monte Cassino in Italy or Cluny in France weren't just places of worship. They were the beating heart of scholarship in an age where most of Europe was illiterate. Within their scriptoriums, monks spent years hunched over parchment, copying ancient texts word by word, illustration by illustration. A single Bible could take an entire lifetime to complete. These weren't just books, they were treasures, often worth more than the land the monastery stood on. But with such value came danger. Viking raids, wars between kingdoms, even conflicts within the church itself could lead to the destruction of these irreplaceable works. Imagine a band of invaders storming the gates, torches in hand, with no regard for the knowledge stored inside. Or a zealous ruler demanding certain texts be burned for contradicting official doctrine. In moments like these, the monks faced an impossible choice: surrender their books to destruction or find a way to hide them. And so they looked down beneath their feet, where no one would think to search. The genius of these hidden libraries wasn't just their secrecy, it was their simplicity. Trapdoors concealed beneath rugs, false floors in the choir stalls, even hollowed-out spaces beneath altars. Some were accessed through twisting staircases hidden behind tapestries, others by lifting a single unassuming floor tile. The very mundanity of these hiding spots made them brilliant. After all, who would think to check under the church floor for forbidden philosophy or heretical science? Yet these secret chambers held everything from pagan poetry to early medical texts, works that would have been lost forever if not for the monks' quiet defiance. What's fascinating is how these hidden libraries reflect a deeper truth about the medieval world. Knowledge was power, and power was always under threat. The same monasteries that preached piety also became sanctuaries for ideas too dangerous to be seen. And so, while kings fought over land and bishops debated doctrine, the monks did something far more radical. They ensured that the future would remember what the present tried to erase. The design of these hidden libraries wasn't just about concealment. It was a masterclass in medieval engineering. Take the Abbey of St. Gall in Switzerland, where monks didn't just dig a hole and drop books inside. They constructed an entire underground network, complete with chambers designed to mimic the layout of the abbey above. Some rooms were lined with limestone to absorb moisture, protecting fragile parchment from dampness. Others featured narrow, twisting passageways that forced intruders to move single file, buying precious time for the monks to react. And then there were the entrances ingeniously disguised as ordinary parts of the abbey's daily life. A floor tile that lifted to reveal a staircase, a section of the choir stalls that swung open like a door, even a confessional booth with a hidden compartment beneath it. These weren't just hiding places, they were feats of architectural deception. What's remarkable is how these designs adapted to the unique threats of their time. In some abbeys, ventilation shafts were cleverly concealed within decorative columns, allowing air to circulate without revealing the library's location. At Monte Cassino in Italy, manuscripts were stored in lead-lined chests beneath the floor, protecting them from both fire and humidity. And in certain English monasteries, builders incorporated blind corridors and dead-end tunnels meant to confuse anyone who stumbled upon the entrance. These weren't random choices, they were calculated solutions to very real dangers. After all, a library hidden beneath an abbey was only as secure as its weakest point. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of these designs is how they reflect the psychology of secrecy. The builders understood that the best hiding places are often in plain sight. At the Abbey of Corvey in Germany, for example, the entrance to the underground library was hidden behind a seemingly ordinary prayer niche. No one would think to inspect a space devoted to piety for something as worldly as books. Similarly, many of these hidden chambers were positioned directly beneath the most heavily trafficked areas of the abbey: the chapel, the refectory, the cloisters. The logic was brilliant. The constant activity above would mask any sounds from below, while the very boldness of the location made it less suspicious. But these architectural marvels weren't just about defense, they were about preservation. The monks knew that even the most perfectly hidden library was useless if the books inside crumbled to dust. That's why so many of these spaces featured clever environmental controls. Some used natural stone walls to regulate temperature, while others employed channels of running water to maintain humidity levels. In a few cases, manuscripts were even stored in clay jars sealed with beeswax, a technique borrowed from ancient Roman wine preservation. Every detail, from the thickness of the walls to the angle of the staircases, was meticulously planned to serve a single purpose: keeping knowledge alive for a future that might not even remember the hands that saved it. The legacy of these designs stretches far beyond the Middle Ages. Modern archivists still study them for inspiration, marveling at how medieval monks solved problems we grapple with today: how to protect irreplaceable knowledge from disaster, how to balance accessibility with security, how to ensure that truth survives even when power tries to bury it. And in some cases, these hidden libraries did more than just preserve books. They preserved entire ways of thinking. When the Renaissance dawned centuries later, scholars would rediscover many of these long-lost texts, sparking revolutions in science, philosophy, and art. All because someone long ago had the foresight to build a secret beneath the stones. The monks who guarded these hidden libraries weren't just caretakers, they were warriors in a silent battle for the survival of knowledge. Picture a scribe in 9th century Ireland, hunched over his desk as the distant echo of Viking longships reaches the shore. In that moment, he isn't just copying a text, he's racing against time, knowing these pages might be all that remains of centuries of learning if the raiders break through the monastery gates. This scene played out across medieval Europe, from the storm-lashed Skellig Michael, where Irish monks hauled precious manuscripts to sea caves, to the sun-baked scriptoriums of Toledo, where Mozarabic Christians preserved Aristotle's works under the watchful eyes of Islamic caliphs. What set these guardians apart wasn't just their bravery, it was their deep engagement with the texts they protected. These weren't passive librarians shelving books, they were active participants in an ongoing conversation across time. A monk copying Boethius might add his own commentary in the margins, connecting ancient philosophy to contemporary theology. In Spain, scribes working under Islamic rule developed a distinctive Mozarabic script, fusing Latin and Arabic calligraphy to keep Christian texts alive while blending cultural influences. Sometimes they made more controversial edits, softening passages that challenged church doctrine or inserting explanations to make pagan philosophy palatable to medieval readers. These weren't acts of censorship so much as acts of translation, making ancient wisdom usable for new generations. The scale of their dedication becomes staggering when you consider the physical labor involved. Before the printing press, every book was a handmade masterpiece requiring months of work. A single copy of Augustine's City of God might need the skins of 200 sheep turned into parchment, each page scraped smooth with pumice stone before being painstakingly inked with quills cut from goose feathers. And these scribes weren't working in ideal conditions. They toiled by flickering candlelight in damp stone chambers, their hands cramping from hours of precise lettering. Yet they persisted, driven by the belief that these words mattered more than their own comfort. Their legacy extends far beyond preservation. By choosing which texts to save and how to interpret them, these monk scholars shaped the intellectual landscape of Europe for centuries. When Charlemagne wanted to revive classical learning in his empire, it was monastic libraries that provided the foundation. The very structure of medieval universities grew from these abbey scriptoriums, where debates about ancient texts evolved into formalized education. Even the modern concept of footnotes traces back to those marginal annotations monks left like breadcrumbs for future readers. Most remarkably, these guardians often worked without expectation of recognition. Unlike kings who built monuments to their own glory, these scribes signed their work with simple phrases like "Pray for the soul of the writer." They understood that true preservation meant creating something that would outlast them, not just the physical books but the ideas within them. When we read a surviving manuscript today, we're not just seeing words on a page, we're witnessing the quiet defiance of those who refuse to let darkness have the final word. The contents of these hidden libraries read like a forbidden reading list from across the ages, texts that could topple empires, unravel dogmas, or spark revolutions if they fell into the wrong hands. Take the Gnostic Gospels, those early Christian writings deemed too radical for the New Testament. While bishops preached a single authorized version of Christ's teachings, monks in places like Nag Hammadi buried leather-bound codices containing sayings like, "If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you." These weren't just alternate scriptures, they were spiritual explosives, preserving visions of Christianity that challenged the very foundations of medieval power. Yet the danger wasn't limited to religion. Scientific works like Hippocrates' medical texts or Aristotle's lost dialogues on biology circulated in secret, their empirical methods threatening a world that explained disease as divine punishment. Imagine a monk in 12th century France hiding a manuscript detailing the circulation of blood centuries before Harvey's discovery, knowledge that could get him branded a heretic for contradicting church-approved medicine. Even geography became subversive. Maps showing a spherical Earth or lands beyond Europe undermined the flat, Jerusalem-centered world you preached from pulpits. At Bobbio Abbey, Lucretius' epic poem on the nature of things survived precisely because it was buried. Its atomic theory and denial of divine intervention too explosive for an age that saw God in every thunderclap. The real surprise lies in how eclectic these collections were. Alongside philosophy and theology, you'd find alchemical manuals with recipes for turning base metals into gold, a metaphor for spiritual transformation that power-hungry rulers took literally. Political manifestos advocating peasant rights or limiting royal authority rubbed shoulders with pagan poetry celebrating pre-Christian gods. In some cases, the libraries preserved works their own guardians didn't fully understand, like Arabic treatises on optics or mathematics transcribed phonetically by monks who spoke no Arabic. These weren't curated collections but intellectual lifeboats, saving every fragment that might matter to future generations. What united these disparate texts was their power to unsettle. A single page could dismantle centuries of dogma, as when Renaissance scholars rediscovered these works and realized medieval Europe had forgotten entire schools of Greek philosophy. The library's true value wasn't just in preserving knowledge, it was in preserving alternatives. While kings and popes presented their version of reality as the only possible truth, these buried books whispered, "There are other ways to see the world." And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous idea of all. The Crusades tore through medieval Europe like a storm, leaving ruined abbeys and burned libraries in their wake, yet in their chaos, they also carved unexpected channels for knowledge to flow. When knights returned from the Holy Land, their saddlebags often held treasures far more valuable than gold. Arabic translations of Aristotle, Plato, and Hippocrates, preserved and expanded upon by Islamic scholars while Europe had forgotten them. Monasteries like Clairvaux became secret way stations for this smuggled wisdom, where monks quickly copied the texts before hiding them beneath flagstones or inside hollowed-out altar legs. What makes this exchange so extraordinary is its irony. The same wars that destroyed so much also became history's unlikeliest knowledge transfer. In Toledo, after Christian forces reclaimed the city, teams of Jewish, Muslim, and Christian scholars worked side by side in hidden scriptoriums, translating Arabic versions of Greek classics into Latin. These weren't just scholarly exercises, they were acts of quiet rebellion. A single manuscript of Euclid's geometry, translated from Arabic to Latin in a Burgundian abbey's cellar, could undermine the medieval worldview that placed faith above reason. The Knights Templars' rumored archives add another layer of mystery. As protectors of pilgrimage routes, they had unparalleled access to Eastern and Western texts. Some historians believe their underground vaults, whether in Cyprus, Paris, or Roslin, housed not just treasure but heretical knowledge. Maps contradicting church geography, medical texts challenging humoral theory, even fragments of the Library of Alexandria thought lost forever. When the Templars were disbanded in the early 14th century, their libraries vanished overnight, fueling whispers that surviving knights smuggled the contents into monastic networks. This clandestine exchange laid invisible tracks for the Renaissance to follow. Petrarch's rediscovery of Cicero's letters, the Medicis patronage of Greek scholars, even Copernicus's heliocentric theories, all traced back to texts preserved in hidden abbey libraries during the Crusades' darkest hours. The true legacy of these wars wasn't just territorial. It was the realization that knowledge, once set loose, could never truly be contained. Even as armies clashed above ground, the real revolution was happening beneath their feet, where Inkai fingers turned forbidden pages by candlelight, stitching together a fractured intellectual world. The story of hidden libraries isn't just one of heroes preserving knowledge. It's also a tale of power deciding what should be forgotten. When the Catholic Church published its index of forbidden books in the mid-16th century, abbeys across Europe faced an impossible dilemma. Some texts weren't just risky to possess, their very ideas threatened the foundations of medieval authority. Take Galileo's writings proving Earth moved around the sun, or Copernicus' revolutionary astronomy text that sat gathering dust beneath monastery floors for decades. These weren't merely hidden, they were actively suppressed, their existence known only to a handful of trusted scholars. Yet the line between censorship and protection often blurred in surprising ways. At the Benedictine Abbey of Melk, records show the abbot ordering the destruction of certain manuscripts, but monks secretly preserved them behind false walls, gambling that future generations might judge these ideas differently. In other cases, forbidden texts received careful edits rather than outright destruction. A single manuscript might have controversial pages glued together or passages overwritten with approved theology, creating a palimpsest where the original meaning still lurked beneath the surface. This wasn't just about obedience, it reflected a deep tension within the church itself about who got to decide what truth looked like. The most revealing examples come from personal correspondence between abbots. One letter from a Spanish monastery complains about the inconvenient diligence of certain monks who kept rescuing books from the burn pile. Another describes hiding heretical texts not to suppress them, but to shield them from overzealous inspectors until cooler heads prevailed. These documents show medieval abbeys as battlegrounds where competing visions of knowledge clashed daily, where one monk's dangerous heresy was another's sacred duty to preserve. What makes this suppression so fascinating is how often it backfired. By driving certain ideas underground, the Church inadvertently made them more alluring. Forbidden astronomy texts circulated with handwritten notes debating their merits. Banned medical manuals became prized possessions passed between trusted physicians. Even the index itself became a sort of anti-catalog, with scholars using it as a checklist of works worth seeking out. In the shadows beneath abbey floors, censorship created its own kind of intellectual rebellion, proof that once an idea exists, no amount of suppression can truly erase it. The legacy of this tension still echoes today. Modern libraries grapple with similar questions about controversial materials, weighing preservation against potential harm. But medieval monks left us an unexpected lesson. Sometimes the very act of trying to erase an idea ensures its survival. Those hidden pages, those carefully edited passages, those secret debates in abbey cellars, they all whisper the same uncomfortable truth. Knowledge, once set loose in the world, has a way of outlasting those who try to control it. It might seem like fate when a shepherd stumbles upon ancient scrolls in a desert cave, or when a book hunter brushes dust off a forgotten manuscript, but these so-called accidents often reveal a deeper truth about how knowledge survives. Take Poggio Bracciolini's legendary discovery in 1417. The Italian scholar wasn't searching for Lucretius' poem, On the Nature of Things, when he combed through that German abbey's shelves. He was hunting for anything salvageable amid the medieval clutter, rescuing whatever scraps of classical wisdom hadn't yet crumbled to dust. What he found would ignite minds for centuries, a radical text arguing that the universe operated by natural laws, not divine whims, an idea so explosive it helped seed the Enlightenment. These rediscoveries share an uncanny pattern. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls found by a shepherd tossing stones into a cave, or the Nag Hammadi codices unearthed by farmers digging for fertilizer, the most transformative texts often resurface through ordinary people engaged in mundane tasks. There's poetry in that. While kings and popes built monuments to their own glory, the real treasures of civilization survived in the unlikeliest places, tucked behind wine barrels, buried beneath sheep pastures, or hidden in plain sight among monastery account books. The monks who originally concealed them understood something profound. Obscurity could be a greater protector than any fortress. Yet the drama of rediscovery often overshadows the meticulous work that followed. Imagine Bracciolini's hands trembling as he copied Lucretius' poem by candlelight, knowing this single manuscript could vanish again if lost in transit back to Italy. Or consider the scholars who spent decades piecing together the Dead Sea Scrolls, their fragments scattered like jigsaw puzzles across millennia. These texts didn't just reappear, they were resurrected through painstaking labor, their ideas carefully reintroduced to a world that might still reject them. What's most striking is how these chants finds ripple through time. That German abbey's forgotten corner didn't just yield a poem, it gave the Renaissance a roadmap to question dogma. The Shepherd's Cave didn't just hold old scrolls, it offered a window into Jewish life during Roman rule. Every rediscovery whispers the same lesson: history never truly forgets. It simply waits, patient as a monk's steady hand, for the right moment to speak again. Behind every great medieval library, there were women whose hands inked the parchment, whose voices defended the texts, and whose leadership ensured knowledge survived the ages. While history remembers the monks, convents across Europe operated as parallel centers of learning where abbesses wielded intellectual authority that often rivaled their male counterparts. Take Hildegard of Bingen, a 12th century polymath, who not only composed music and theological works, but personally supervised the copying of manuscripts in her Rhineland convent. Her illuminated civias, with its dazzling visions of the divine, wasn't just a spiritual masterpiece, it was a defiant act of scholarship at a time when women's voices were routinely silenced. The scale of women's contributions becomes breathtaking when you examine convents like Los Huelgas near Burgos, Spain. Here, aristocratic nuns curated a library that included Arabic medical texts translated from Toledo's workshops, alongside troubadour poetry and legal commentaries. These weren't just devotional works, they were evidence of women engaging with the most cutting-edge ideas of their time. A nun copying Avicenna's canon of medicine wasn't merely preserving knowledge, she was participating in debates about anatomy and healing that would shape European medicine for centuries. And because convents often enjoyed more autonomy than monasteries shielded by royal patrons or physical remoteness, their libraries sometimes housed texts too controversial for mainstream circulation. What's striking is how these women circumvented societal limits. In Saxon convents like Gandersheim, nuns wrote histories and plays under the protection of powerful abbesses, creating an entire literary tradition that blended classical learning with female perspectives. The 10th century playwright Hrzwitha modeled her works after Roman comedies, but centered on virtuous women outwitting male oppressors, a radical act of reinterpretation. Meanwhile, in Italy's Monte Cassino region, anonymous nuns perfected the art of disguising subversive content. A psalter might contain coded marginalia about herbal remedies forbidden by the church, or a hymnal hide notes questioning theological orthodoxy between its musical notations. The true measure of their impact lies in the networks they sustained. Convents functioned as nodes in a vast informal web of female knowledge sharing. A noblewoman sending her daughter to be educated at Chelles Abbey near Paris might receive letters containing medical recipes copied from the convent's Arabic texts. Bavarian nuns exchanged embroidery patterns that secretly encoded astrological charts. Even seemingly domestic arts like weaving held intellectual weight. The Bayeux Tapestry's sister artworks, now lost, allegedly included Latin couplets explaining Norman legal concepts. These women didn't just preserve books, they created alternative systems of transmission that bypassed male-controlled institutions, yet their legacy faced systematic erasure. When Renaissance humanists rediscovered classical texts, they often credited male scholars while ignoring the convent libraries that kept those works alive. A 15th-century manuscript of Plato might bear a monk's gloss but show traces of an earlier nun's annotations scraped away. Modern archivists now use spectral imaging to recover these ghostly feminine hands beneath layers of male commentary, literally uncovering voices that history tried to bury. The deeper lesson here isn't just about correcting the record, it's about recognizing how knowledge survives against all odds. Whether through the grand libraries of abbesses or the secret stitch codes of embroiderers, medieval women proved that ideas can't be contained by stone walls or societal rules. They remind us that history's most transformative revolutions often begin not with fanfare, but with the quiet turning of a page by someone the world told to stay silent. The lengths monks went to protect their hidden libraries didn't just inspire clever hiding spots, they sparked technological breakthroughs that would have impressed even the most skilled engineers of their time. At the Abbey of St. Wandrille in Normandy, scribes devised an ingenious pulley system where ropes threaded through hollowed-out columns could lower entire book chests into underground chambers with a simple counterweight mechanism. Imagine the scene. A monk tugs discreetly on what appears to be an ordinary bell rope, and seconds later, a section of the stone floor silently descends like a medieval elevator, revealing priceless manuscripts safe from raiders or inspectors. Security measures went far beyond simple concealment. Some abbeys developed early forms of tamper-evident seals using colored wax that would shatter if a manuscript was opened without authorization. Others crafted intricate locking mechanisms where the key itself was a puzzle, like those at Reichenau Abbey, where turning the correct sequence of geometrically shaped notches would release a hidden drawer beneath a choir stall. The most sophisticated systems employed psychological tricks, like the Abbey of St. Gall's false library, a decoy collection of approved texts left in plain view while the truly dangerous works rested behind a rotating bookcase in the abbot's private quarters. What's remarkable is how these innovations responded to specific threats. In coastal monasteries vulnerable to Viking raids, ironclad chests were designed to survive fires by lining the interiors with layers of wet sand between metal plates. At Monte Cassino, scribes experimented with ink formulations that would fade when exposed to light for too long, creating manuscripts that could be read by candlelight but would self-erase if confiscated and examined in daylight. Even climate control became a science. Some underground libraries used convection channels that funneled heat from the abbey's kitchens to prevent dampness, while others positioned their chambers above natural underground springs to maintain constant humidity. These weren't just isolated experiments, they represented a network of shared knowledge. Monastic orders exchanged technical details through coded letters, with phrases like, "The brethren in Burgundy have improved the water clock," hinting at new security methods. A single innovation from Cluny might appear months later in Canterbury, adapted to local needs. This informal R&D network anticipated modern intellectual property sharing by centuries, all driven by the urgent need to stay one step ahead of those who would destroy the books they guarded. The legacy of these medieval engineers lives on in unexpected ways. Modern museum conservation techniques trace their roots to the moisture-controlled chambers of St. Wandrille. Digital encryptions, tamper-evident protocols mirror those wax seals that revealed prying hands. Even the rotating bookcase concept evolved into today's secure server rooms with hidden access points. Every time we swipe a keycard to enter a restricted archive or scan a fragile manuscript under controlled lighting, we're following in the footsteps of those inventive monks who proved that where there's a will to preserve knowledge, human ingenuity will always find a way. Beneath the vaulted ceilings of Fulda Abbey, whispers swirled about a text so potent it could unravel the very fabric of nature, the legendary Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus. While most monks copied psalms and patristic commentaries, a select few in places like Fulda or Mont Saint Michel guarded manuscripts filled with cryptic diagrams of celestial spheres, recipes for philosopher's stone, and astrological charts mapping the influence of planets on human fate. These weren't just curiosities, they were dangerous knowledge where the pursuit of turning lead into gold blurred seamlessly into the search for spiritual transformation. What made these texts so controversial wasn't merely their occult associations, it was how they straddled the line between heresy and cutting-edge science. The same Abbey cellar might house an Arabic treatise on distillation, a technique we now recognize as chemistry, beside a manual on summoning planetary spirits. Monks like the 14th century alchemist John of Rupecissa worked in this liminal space, documenting how to purify substances using methods that would later form the basis of modern medicine, all while framing their work as a divine quest to uncover God's hidden laws. The irony is profound. The very texts condemned as superstition by some church authorities contained seeds of empirical observation that would blossom into the scientific method. The legends surrounding these collections grew wilder with time. Fulda's rumored copy of the Emerald Tablet, a text claiming, "as above, so below," to describe cosmic symmetry, allegedly drove one monk mad after he deciphered its secrets. At St. Gall, a 12th century scribe wrote of discovering a manuscript so luminous it required no candle to read, its pages infused with moonlight and quicksilver. While these tales are likely embellished, they reveal a deeper truth. Medieval scholars understood that some knowledge carried risks beyond mere censorship. To study alchemy was to dance with forces that could unsettle one's faith or sanity, a price many were willing to pay for glimpses into nature's hidden order. Yet the occult manuscript's true legacy lies in their unexpected practicality. Between spells and invocations, monks recorded metallurgical techniques still used in jewelry making today, or herb lore that formed the basis of early pharmacology. The Vienna Dioscorides, a 6th century botanical text preserved in a Byzantine monastery, mixed medicinal plant illustrations with zodiacal gardening guides, showing how superstition and science coexisted in daily practice. Even astrology, now dismissed as pseudoscience, drove meticulous astronomical observations that later enabled Copernicus to calculate planetary motion. The mystique endures because these works remind us how progress rarely follows straight lines. The same vault that held treatises on demonology might also preserve the first written account of distillation, a process essential to modern chemistry. When Renaissance figures like Isaac Newton pored over rediscovered alchemical texts, they weren't indulging in fantasy. They were mining centuries of accumulated observation for fragments of truth. The hidden libraries didn't just preserve knowledge, they safeguarded humanity's unquenchable curiosity, even when it ventured into the shadows. When Petrarch climbed the worn steps of the Abbey of Saint Victor in Paris around 1333, he wasn't just visiting another monastery, he was stepping into a time machine. There, beneath the dust of centuries, he found letters by Cicero that had been copied and recopied by generations of monks, their words preserved like insects in amber. This moment, one scholar's hands trembling as they brushed the page, was the spark that ignited the Renaissance. But Petrarch was just the first in a wave of humanist treasure hunters who fanned out across Europe, turning abbey libraries into intellectual gold mines. At Corby Abbey near Amiens, scholars discovered a 9th century manuscript of Tacitus' Annals, a work so rare many thought it lost forever. In Monte Cassino, Boccaccio stumbled upon a crumbling copy of Apuleius the Golden Ass, a novel that would inspire Renaissance artists for generations. These weren't just lucky finds, they were deliberate rescues, the culmination of centuries of monks hiding knowledge like squirrels burying acorns for a future they'd never see. What made these rediscoveries so transformative was their timing. Europe in the 14th century was ripe for intellectual revolution. Plague had shattered old certainties, trade routes buzzed with new ideas, and a growing literate class hungered for knowledge beyond church-sanctioned texts. When humanists like Erasmus began reconstructing classical philosophy from Abbey manuscripts, they weren't just reviving old ideas, they were weaponizing them. A single recovered passage from Lucretius about atoms and void could undermine medieval cosmology. A rediscovered copy of Vitruvius' writings on architecture would inspire Brunelleschi's dome in Florence. Even seemingly mundane texts like Roman farming manuals revolutionized agriculture when their techniques resurfaced after centuries underground. The Abbey of Corby stands as a perfect case study. Its scriptorium had operated continuously since the Carolingian era, with monks copying everything from Virgil to legal codes. But during the Viking raids, they'd bricked up their most precious manuscripts inside the abbey walls, a decision that paid off spectacularly when Renaissance scholars broke through those same walls 500 years later. Among the treasures they found was the earliest known copy of Cicero's De Orata, a text that would become the Bible of Renaissance rhetoric. Another Corby manuscript, a 7th century commentary on Plato, contained marginal notes proving medieval monks had engaged with pagan philosophy far more deeply than previously believed. These finds didn't just fill gaps in knowledge, they rewrote the narrative of intellectual history itself. Yet the journey from Abbey vault to Renaissance salon was fraught with drama. Manuscripts often arrived in fragments, requiring scholars to play detective across continents. When Poggio Bracciolini found Quintilian's Institutio Oratoria in a Swiss abbey, parts had been repurposed as bookbinding scraps. He spent years tracking down missing pages from Naples to London. Other texts bore the scars of censorship, pages glued together by wary monks, controversial passages scratched out but still faintly visible. The humanists became experts at reading between the lines, both literally and figuratively, reassembling fractured traditions like archaeologists piecing together a shattered vase. The ripple effects were staggering. Florence's Platonic Academy, founded after Cosimo de' Medici obtained abbey manuscripts of Plato's complete works, became the incubator for Neoplatonism that would influence art, science, and politics for centuries. The mathematical treatises Fibonacci encountered in North African monasteries, themselves copies of texts preserved in Byzantine abbeys, revolutionized European commerce with Arabic numerals. Even the printing press, often hailed as a sudden invention, relied on centuries of typographical experiments by monks trying to standardize script in their scriptoriums. What's often overlooked is how these rediscoveries created a new kind of scholar, one who valued original sources over received wisdom. When Lorenzo Valla proved the donation of Constantine a forgery using textual analysis techniques honed on abbey manuscripts, he didn't just discredit a document, he pioneered modern historical criticism. The Renaissance wasn't just a rebirth of classical knowledge, it was the moment Europe learned to question how knowledge itself was constructed. And it all began with those quiet moments in abbey libraries, when a curious humanist lifted a floor tile or tapped a hollow sounding wall, listening for the echoes of a forgotten world. The relationship between power and hidden libraries reveals an uncomfortable truth. Knowledge was never neutral in the medieval world. It was a weapon kings and popes sought to control. When Henry VIII ordered the dissolution of England's monasteries in the 1530s, his soldiers weren't just seizing land and wealth, they were dismantling an entire intellectual infrastructure. Manuscripts that had survived Viking raids and civil wars were tossed onto bonfires or sold as scrap parchment to bookbinders. But what Henry didn't account for was the quiet defiance of monks like those at Revolk's Abbey, who bricked up their rarest volumes inside the very walls the king's men were tearing down. Centuries later, renovations would reveal cavities stuffed with theological works, chronicles of Norman rule, and even banned Lollard Bible's testaments to a resistance fought not with swords, but with secrecy. The Vatican's approach was more calculated. By the late 16th century, the Church had perfected the art of knowledge management through what we now call the secret archives. But its roots stretch back to earlier papal policies of selective preservation, saving texts that reinforced doctrine while quietly disappearing those that challenged it. A telling example comes from the Abbey of Farfa outside Rome, where investigators found two versions of the same 9th century chronicle, one on public shelves praising papal authority, another hidden beneath the refectory detailing land seizures by church officials. This wasn't just censorship, it was historical airbrushing on an institutional scale, proving how control over libraries meant control over collective memory. Political maneuvers around these collections often backfired in unexpected ways. After the French Revolution, when revolutionary troops ransacked monastic libraries, they inadvertently scattered manuscripts that had been deliberately confined for centuries. A 12th century copy of Roman civil law, kept underground by French abbots to prevent challenges to ecclesiastical courts, wound up in a Parisian printer's shop, where it became a key reference for Napoleon's legal reformers. Similarly, when Swedish troops looted Prague during the 30 Years' War, they seized hundreds of occult manuscripts from Rudolf II's collections, many originally salvaged from dissolved monasteries. These books, intended to bolster Sweden's imperial prestige, instead fueled scientific revolutions by introducing forgotten alchemical concepts to Northern Europe. The most revealing clashes occurred when political and religious agendas collided. In 15th century Spain, Queen Isabella authorized the creation of hidden libraries within newly conquered Granada's mosques, not to destroy Islamic texts but to study them. Her confessor, Cardinal Cisneros, famously burned thousands of Arabic manuscripts in the town square, yet secretly preserved hundreds more in a sealed chamber beneath Toledo's cathedral. This duality, public destruction paired with private preservation, shows how political leaders often played both sides, recognizing that even forbidden knowledge might prove useful later. What emerges from these stories isn't just a tale of suppression, but a pattern of unintended consequences. Every time a ruler like Henry VIII tried to erase inconvenient histories, they created gaps that later scholars would dedicate lifetimes to filling. When popes locked away controversial texts, they inadvertently increased their mystique and future influence. The political battles over these hidden libraries prove a timeless lesson. Knowledge, once created, cannot be fully controlled. It waits patiently in darkness, ready to reshape the world whenever someone dares to turn the page. Legends swirl around these hidden libraries like mist through cloisters, each tale more tantalizing than the last. Take the story whispered in Burgundy's wine country, where locals claim the Abbey of Cluny still guards a chamber sealed since the 12th century, its entrance marked by a floor tile carved with a sleeping dragon. Supposedly, any who disturb it will find not gold, but shelves of manuscripts so heretical they were walled up with the bones of the monk who dared to preserve them. Then there's the persistent myth of Glastonbury Abbey's underground scriptorium, said to hold not only Arthurian legends transcribed by monks, but the original charter proving King Arthur's historical existence, a document that could rewrite British history if ever uncovered. What makes these stories so compelling isn't their plausibility, but what they reveal about our collective imagination. The recurring motif of cursed manuscripts, like the fabled Devil's Psalter of Melk Abbey, allegedly causing madness in anyone who reads its backward Latin, speaks to medieval anxieties about forbidden knowledge. Ghostly librarians, like the spectral figure reported pacing the ruins of Lindisfarne, embody the enduring devotion these guardians showed in life. Even the Library of Alexandria, that grandest of all lost archives, found its way into Abbey lore. Monastic chronicles from Mount Athos claim refugees smuggled out scrolls that eventually wound up beneath Norman monasteries, though historians dismiss this as wishful thinking. The Cathar legends are particularly haunting. After the Albigensian Crusade annihilated this medieval sect, rumors persisted that their last priests had hidden sacred texts in the Pyrenees cave networks. One recurring tale tells of a shepherd who stumbled upon a cavern lined with strange books before the entrance mysteriously sealed behind him. Modern searches have turned up nothing, yet the story endures, fed by discoveries like the accidental unearthing of Montsega's hidden chamber in 1958, not a library, but proof that the mountains still guard secrets. Perhaps the most fascinating myths are those that blur the line between legend and reality. The Voynich manuscript, that cryptic 15th century puzzle now at Yale, was allegedly found in a chest beneath an Italian abbey's wine cellar, yet no records confirm its origins. Similarly, the mysterious Ripley scrolls, alchemical diagrams now in the British Museum, were said to have been copied from originals hidden beneath Fountains Abbey after the dissolution. Whether these stories are true matters less than what they signify. Our innate belief that somewhere beneath the stones of these ancient buildings, history still holds its breath, waiting to be rediscovered. What unites these tales is their power to transform dusty archives into something alive with possibility. They remind us that every crumbling manuscript represents not just ink on parchment, but the hopes and fears of those who risked everything to preserve them. And who's to say some legends aren't still out there, waiting for the right moment and the right curious soul to turn the page? The hunt for these clandestine libraries has entered a new era where cutting-edge technology meets old-fashioned detective work. Ground-penetrating radar now scans beneath ancient abbey floors, revealing hollow spaces invisible to the naked eye. In Austria's Melk Abbey, that very technology uncovered a forgotten chamber in 2015, its walls lined with shelves that hadn't felt a human touch in centuries. But here's the fascinating part. The real challenge isn't just finding these spaces, but interpreting what they left behind. When archaeologists opened that vault at Melk, they didn't discover neatly catalogued manuscripts. Instead, they found fragments, parchment scraps used as insulation between stones, bindings repurposed as wall patching, even ink-stained fingerprints preserved in the mortar. These weren't just artifacts, they were silent witnesses to someone's desperate attempt to recycle knowledge rather than lose it completely. Modern searches have become exercises in creative reconstruction. At Mont Saint-Michel, researchers using multispectral imaging discovered that seemingly blank pages in a 15th century ledger were actually palimpsests' older texts scrubbed away to save precious parchment. Beneath the surface, faint traces of a 9th century herbal manual emerged, its plant illustrations still visible under ultraviolet light. Similar techniques at Salisbury Cathedral revealed musical notations hidden beneath layers of later chant books, proving medieval scribes often reused materials from their own secret stashes. The irony is delicious. The very act of erasing texts to avoid detection sometimes preserved them better than careful storage ever could. The tools of discovery keep evolving. LiDAR scans at Whitby Abbey mapped underground tunnels too narrow for human exploration, sending robotic cameras through passages no wider than a prayer book. In Spain's Pyrenees, drones equipped with thermal cameras located temperature anomalies that led to a network of natural caves adapted for manuscript storage, complete with charcoal ventilation shafts and shelves carved directly into the rock. Each technological leap brings fresh surprises, like the recent use of AI to reconstruct fragmented texts from multiple European collections, digitally reuniting pages separated by wars and time. Yet for all our advanced methods, some secrets still yield only to patience and luck. When heavy rains eroded a hillside near Bobbio Abbey in 2019, a farmer noticed peculiar rectangular stones tumbling down the slope, the collapsed ceiling of a scriptorium no one knew existed. Inside, archivists found inkwells still caked with dried pigment, their colors chemically matched to specific manuscripts now housed miles away. Such discoveries remind us that while technology opens doors, the past still chooses when and how to reveal itself. What drives this relentless search isn't just academic curiosity. It's the growing realization that these hidden libraries represent missing pieces in humanity's collective memory. Every recovered fragment, whether it's a scrap of Aristotle's lost dialogues or a merchant's inventory proving long-distance trade routes, has the power to recalibrate our understanding of history. And with each abbey floor scanned, each crumbling wall probed, we're not just uncovering books. We're retrieving voices that someone, centuries ago, risked everything to save. The moment a hidden library is uncovered, a new struggle begins, not against time or decay, but over who has the right to claim history itself. Consider the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the mid-20th century by Bedouin shepherds in caves near Qumran. What should have been a triumphant rediscovery of ancient Jewish texts quickly devolved into a geopolitical tug-of-war, with Jordan, Israel, and even private collectors battling for control. Scholars who had dedicated their lives to studying these fragile fragments suddenly found themselves sidelined as governments debated ownership behind closed doors. The scrolls sat in vaults for years, their insights into early Judaism and Christianity locked away not by crumbling parchment, but by human conflict. This tension between preservation and possession plays out in quieter ways across the globe. When a cache of medieval manuscripts surfaced beneath a Spanish cathedral during renovations in 2012, the Vatican and local bishops clashed over whether these documents belonged to the Universal Church or the diocese where they were found. Meanwhile, historians watched helplessly as legal teams argued over access precious years when fragile inks could fade or parchments crumble while lawyers debated jurisdiction. Even private collectors, often vilified as hoarders, sometimes preserve texts that institutions neglect. The controversial sale of the Crosby-Scoian Codex, a 6th century Christian manuscript, to a Norwegian collector in 1998 sparked outrage, yet its meticulous conservation in a climate-controlled private library may have saved it from deterioration in an underfunded museum. The ethical dilemmas deepen when indigenous knowledge is involved. Ethiopian monks at Lake Tonna's island monasteries still guard illuminated gospels and medical texts seized by European collectors during colonial raids. While Western institutions argue these artifacts are safer in temperature-controlled museums, Ethiopian scholars counter that removing them severed living connections to cultural practices like the tradition of scribes who still copy manuscripts using centuries-old techniques. Similar conflicts simmer over Mayan codices in European collections and Maori oral histories recorded by missionaries now held in foreign archives. These aren't just custody battles, they're clashes over whether knowledge is a universal human heritage or an inseparable part of specific communities. Technology offers both solutions and new complications. High-resolution digitization projects like the Vatican's efforts with the Bodmer papyri allow global access while keeping fragile originals secure. But when a tech company scanned thousands of manuscripts from Timbuktu's libraries after jihadist threats in 2012, debates erupted over who owned the digital copies, the Malian families who had safeguarded the texts for generations, or the foundation that funded the scanning. Even blockchain is entering the fray, with some institutions experimenting with decentralized ledgers to track provenance and access rights transparently. At its core, these conflicts reveal a painful truth. Preserving knowledge is only half the battle. The other half is reckoning with who gets to decide what stories are told, who can access them, and perhaps most crucially, who benefits from their rediscovery. Every time a hidden library resurfaces, it holds up a mirror to our own era's values, forcing us to confront whether we're any wiser than those medieval monks who buried truth to keep it safe. The digital age has transformed these once hidden medieval manuscripts from fragile relics into living texts that anyone with an internet connection can explore. Projects like the Digitized Medieval Manuscripts Initiative don't just photograph pages. They use multispectral imaging to reveal erased marginalia, 3D modeling to recreate the experience of holding an original codex, and even AI-assisted transcription to decode faded scripts. A scholar in Tokyo can now examine watermarks on a 12th century psalter from Canterbury Cathedral, while a student in Buenos Aires traces the same monk's marginal doodles that once amused his brothers during long scriptorium nights. This isn't just preservation, it's resurrection, bringing voices silenced for centuries back into global conversation. What makes this digital revolution so groundbreaking is how it solves problems the monks themselves couldn't foresee. Humidity-controlled vaults protect originals, but digital copies ensure that even if disaster strikes, whether fire, flood, or conflict, the knowledge survives. When ISIS militants targeted Mosul's libraries in 2014, archivists had already secretly digitized thousands of manuscripts, saving texts that dated back to the early Christian era. Similarly, climate change threatens parchment preservation in historic abbeys. Now, temperature fluctuations that would crack brittle pages merely pause a server until the cooling system kicks back on. The irony is profound. Medieval monks buried knowledge to protect it from human hands, while we upload it to protect it from time itself. Yet the most exciting developments lie in how technology reveals what the naked eye can't see. At Stanford's Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies, researchers using hyperspectral imaging discovered layers of annotation beneath the visible text of a 14th century medical manual, notes documenting plague treatments that had been scrubbed away during later epidemics, likely because they contradicted church-approved cures. In Austria, a team applying machine learning to digitized music manuscripts reconstructed melodies not heard since the Black Death, their notation systems having fallen into obscurity. These aren't just academic exercises, they're bridges across time, letting us eavesdrop on debates about medicine, philosophy, and faith that shaped our world. The democratization of access brings its own quiet revolution, where once only elite scholars with Abbey connections could study these works. Now a high school student in Nairobi can zoom in on the intricate botanical illustrations of the Vienna Dioscurides, or a retired mechanic in Quebec can trace the migration of Norse myths through digitized Icelandic sagas. Online annotation tools allow global crowdsourcing of translations, with amateurs sometimes spotting patterns professionals miss, like a Swedish pensioner who recognized her grandmother's folk remedies in the marginalia of a digitized German herbal. This collective engagement fulfills the monk's deepest purpose, not just preserving knowledge but keeping it alive through use. Challenges remain, of course. Digital archives require constant maintenance as file formats obsolescence, a modern equivalent of monks recopying fading ink. Copyright disputes sometimes lock scans behind paywalls, recreating medieval access barriers in digital guise. And no screen can fully capture the scent of centuries-old parchment or the weight of a metal-clasped codex in one's hands. But these limitations only highlight the complementary roles of old and new. Physical manuscripts connect us viscerally to the past, while their digital twins ensure their ideas never face extinction again. Perhaps the most poetic outcome is how these technologies honor the monks' original ingenuity. Their hidden libraries were acts of defiance against the idea that knowledge should be controlled by the powerful. Today, as digitized manuscripts circulate freely online, bypassing institutional gatekeepers and national borders, we're witnessing the same spirit at work, proving that once an idea takes flight, neither stone walls nor firewalls can contain it for long. Hidden libraries have long been the lifeblood of storytelling, their shadowy corridors and whispered secrets inspiring some of the most iconic works in literature and film. Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose didn't just feature a labyrinthine monastic library, it turned one into the novel's central character, a place where the pursuit of forbidden knowledge could be as deadly as any blade. Eco's fictional Abbey, with its maze-like structure and deadly secrets, echoed the very real tension medieval monks faced between preserving truth and surviving those who feared it. The book's success proved something profound. Even in our modern age, the idea of a hidden archive, guarded, dangerous, and pulsing with forgotten wisdom still holds us spellbound. This fascination stretches far beyond historical fiction. Think of the restricted section in Hogwarts Library, where the Harry Potter series gave generations of readers a taste of that same thrill. The moment Harry sneaks beneath his invisibility cloak to explore books so powerful they could kill you, taps into the same primal curiosity that drove medieval scribes to bury manuscripts. It's no accident that J.K. Rowling chose a library as the keeper of magic's darkest secrets. She was drawing on a tradition as old as storytelling itself, where knowledge isn't just power, but a force so potent it must be locked away. Film and television have amplified this allure, transforming hidden libraries into visual spectacles. From the Librarian franchise's troves of mythical artifacts to the Da Vinci Code's chase through vaults of heretical history, these stories all share a common thread: the belief that somewhere, just out of sight, lies a truth powerful enough to rewrite the world. Even Indiana Jones, cinema's greatest fictional archaeologist, spends as much time deciphering ancient texts in candlelit chambers as he does dodging boulders. The message is clear: adventure isn't just about action. It's about uncovering what someone tried desperately to erase. What's most striking is how these fictional portrayals mirror real historical struggles. When Game of Thrones showed Samwell Tarly discovering long-lost dragonglass records in the Citadel's basement, it echoed the real-life rediscovery of texts like Tacitus' annals in monastic vaults. Both remind us that knowledge survives in fragments, and that the aha moments of history often happen in dust-covered corners, not on battlefields. Even video games like The Elder Scrolls or Assassin's Creed build entire quests around lost libraries, proving that the hunger for hidden wisdom transcends medium and generation. This cultural obsession isn't just nostalgia, it's a reflection of our own age. In an era of misinformation and data overload, the idea of a singular, secret truth waiting to be found feels more tantalizing than ever. Hidden libraries in stories offer something we've lost: the certainty that somewhere, if you look hard enough, there's an answer worth finding. Whether it's a monk's coded manuscript or a wizard's spellbook, these fictional vaults keep alive the most subversive idea of all: that no matter how tightly you lock the door, knowledge has a way of escaping into the light. Buried beneath the worn floorboards of Oxford's abbeys, the works of Roger Bacon crackled with ideas so radical they could have ignited the scientific revolution 3 centuries early. This 13th century Franciscan friar penned treatises on optics, chemistry, and even flying machines, concepts so ahead of their time that his superiors ordered them locked away for fear of heresy. One particularly explosive manuscript, his Opus Majus, described the scientific method in startling detail, the importance of empirical observation, the need for repeatable experiments, even the role of mathematics in understanding nature. These weren't just philosophical musings, they were blueprints for a way of thinking that wouldn't take hold until Galileo and Newton walked the earth. The fact that Bacon's works survived at all is a testament to the monks who hid them behind false panels in their libraries, knowing future generations might recognize their value. What makes these scientific manuscripts so revolutionary isn't just their content, it's the worldview they represent. While popular history paints the Middle Ages as a stagnant period where blind faith trumped reason, texts like Bacon's reveal a vibrant undercurrent of inquiry. At Merton College's secret archives, scholars recently uncovered a 14th century manuscript calculating planetary motion with astonishing accuracy, using methods that wouldn't be formally developed until Kepler's time. Another from St. Augustine's Abbey in Canterbury contained detailed sketches of the human circulatory system, predating William Harvey's discovery by 400 years. These weren't lucky guesses, they were systematic investigations buried because they challenged Aristotle's unchallenged authority or contradicted church doctrine. The suppression of these ideas often had less to do with religion than with power. When the Venerable Bede described lunar phases using observational data in 8th century Northumbria, local rulers initially banned his work, not because it contradicted scripture, but because it undermined court astrologers who derived their influence from opaque mysticism. Similarly, Hildegard of Bingen's botanical studies, which correctly linked plant properties to medicinal effects, were dismissed as women's superstition until male physicians rediscovered her manuscript centuries later. The pattern is clear. Knowledge was hidden not necessarily because it was heretical, but because it threatened established hierarchies. Yet some of the most astonishing scientific insights survived through sheer creativity. Take the case of Nicole Orsme, a 14th century bishop who wrote about the Earth's rotation in coded language, embedding his heliocentric theory within a commentary on Aristotle so dense that censors missed it entirely. Or the anonymous monk who disguised a treatise on germ theory as a devotional text describing invisible animalcules in terms of spiritual corruption to avoid suspicion. These works didn't just preserve facts, they preserved a way of thinking, one that valued evidence over authority, curiosity over dogma. The legacy of these hidden scientific texts stretches far beyond individual discoveries. When Renaissance scholars finally unearthed them, they didn't just gain access to forgotten knowledge, they inherited a tradition of questioning that became the foundation of modern science. The real revelation isn't that medieval thinkers anticipated later breakthroughs, but that the so-called Dark Ages were actually alight with intellectual daring, if only you knew where to look. The bustling caravans of the Silk Road carried more than just silks and spices, they were mobile libraries, transporting ideas as freely as they moved gold and ivory. When a Nestorian Christian merchant from Persia tucked a Syriac translation of Aristotle into his saddlebag in the 8th century, he wasn't just carrying a book, he was delivering the intellectual foundation of the Islamic Golden Age to scholars in Baghdad. Along those dusty trails stretching from Constantinople to Chang'an, manuscripts from Abbey libraries became currency as valuable as any coin, traded between monks, merchants, and mathematicians who recognized knowledge had no borders. This exchange transformed the medieval world in ways we're still unraveling. Take the case of the Abbasid Caliphate's House of Wisdom, where scholars pored over Greek philosophy texts that had traveled from Byzantine monasteries through Syrian Christian intermediaries. Without those Silk Road connections, works by Galen and Ptolemy might have been lost forever. Even more fascinating are the unexpected detours these texts took, like the Indian medical treatise that reached a Burgundian abbey after being translated from Sanskrit to Arabic by Persian traders, then from Arabic to Latin by a Sicilian Jewish scholar. The abbey's monks, unaware of its origins, dutifully copied it alongside their psalms, unwittingly preserving Ayurvedic knowledge for European physicians centuries later. The real surprise lies in how ordinary these exchanges often were. A Venetian glassblower might trade a crate of beads for a rare geometry manual in Aleppo's markets. A Tang dynasty official could receive a bundle of Nestorian biblical commentaries as a diplomatic gift from Sogdian merchants. Sometimes the transfer was accidental, like when Mongol raids scattered manuscripts from Krakow's libraries eastward, introducing Polish theology to Central Asian Sufi mystics. What emerged was a sprawling, informal network where ideas mixed as freely as the cultures along the trade routes. This medieval internet had its own protocols and vulnerabilities. Just as data packets today might be rerouted around outages, precious manuscripts took circuitous paths to avoid political upheaval. When the Seljuk Turks disrupted overland routes in the 11th century, Armenian merchants shifted knowledge transfer to Black Sea ports, where Byzantine and Georgian monks maintained scriptoriums in coastal monasteries. Other times, censorship forced creativity, like when Andalusian Jewish traders disguised philosophical texts as commercial ledgers, their numbered columns hiding Maimonides' commentaries beneath mundane inventory lists. The legacy of this exchange still shapes our world. The decimal system we use today traveled from Indian mathematicians to Arab scholars, then entered Europe through Italian trading posts like Pisa, where Fibonacci encountered it and revolutionized Western mathematics. Paper-making techniques smuggled out of China by Nestorian monks reached Baghdad before spreading to European abbeys, replacing costly parchment and democratizing literacy. Even musical notation traces its roots to Byzantine chant manuals carried westward by Bulgarian traders. What's most remarkable is how these connections defied the era's divisions. In an age often painted as insular and suspicious, merchants and monks built bridges of understanding across religions and empires. A Buddhist sutra might be copied by a Zoroastrian scribe for a Christian king, its pages later annotated by a Jewish physician in Cairo. The trade routes didn't just move goods, they wove a tapestry of shared knowledge so resilient that even wars, plagues, and schisms couldn't unravel it completely. And at the heart of it all were those abbey libraries, their hidden treasures slowly seeping into the world, one caravan at a time. Hidden libraries have always been more than stone chambers filled with parchment, their physical manifestations of humanity's deepest paradoxes. The act of burying knowledge to save it speaks to a profound tension, the instinct to safeguard truth while fearing its power. Picture the monks at Bobbio Abbey sealing Lucretius' atomic theories beneath their feet, knowing those words could unsettle their world. In that moment, they weren't just hiding a book, they were wrestling with the same dilemma we face today: how to preserve ideas that might be dangerous now but indispensable later. Consider how these medieval vaults mirror our modern digital archives. When monks carved hidden compartments beneath altars, they were creating the medieval equivalent of encrypted cloud storage, knowledge protected behind layers of secrecy. Today, initiatives like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or Svalbard's Global Seed Vault serve the same purpose, preserving fragile truths against the unpredictable ravages of time, politics, or disaster. The tools have changed, but the impulse remains identical. We still bury knowledge, just in server farms instead of catacombs. The symbolism deepens when we examine what gets saved and what doesn't. Medieval libraries didn't preserve every text equally. They prioritized works deemed too valuable or volatile to lose. Similarly, our digital age grapples with selection bias. Will future historians understand our era from social media posts, or will our most important ideas languish in obsolete formats, as inaccessible as a crumbling palimpsest? The monks' choices haunt us. They saved Cicero but let everyday documents rot, leaving gaping holes in our understanding of medieval life. Are we repeating their mistakes by preserving celebrity tweets while local newspapers vanish into digital voids? Most powerfully, these hidden libraries force us to confront who controls memory. When the Vatican locked away controversial texts in its secret archives, it wasn't just preserving history, it was curating it. Today, when tech companies algorithmically suppress content or governments rewrite digital records, we're replaying those medieval power struggles with higher stakes. The difference: medieval censorship left physical traces, scraped parchment, glued folios, while digital erasures can happen with a keystroke, vanishing without a whisper. Yet there's hope in this parallel. Just as determined scholars eventually unearthed the monks' buried treasures, modern digital archaeologists are developing tools to recover deleted posts, reverse engineer old file formats, and pierce through layers of online obfuscation. The lesson is clear: once knowledge exists, it's nearly impossible to fully erase. Whether hidden beneath Abbey stones or behind encryption, truth has a way of resurfacing often when it's needed most. Ultimately, these secret chambers remind us that preservation is never neutral. Every choice about what to save, from a 9th century scribe selecting which classical text to copy, to a librarian today deciding which websites to archive, shapes the future's understanding of the past. The real treasure in these hidden libraries isn't just the knowledge they protected, but the timeless human struggle they represent. Our endless dance between the fear of truth's power and the desperate need to keep it alive. The future of hidden Abbey libraries isn't just about what we've already found. It's about the tantalizing possibilities still waiting beneath our feet. Right now, in the quiet corners of Europe's oldest monasteries, archaeologists are using ground-penetrating radar to map anomalies under chapel floors, revealing voids that match the dimensions of long-forgotten scriptoriums. One recent scan beneath Worcester Cathedral showed a chamber large enough to hold hundreds of manuscripts, its entrance likely concealed beneath the very stones where priests have walked for centuries. And here's the thrilling part: statistically, only about 15% of potential hiding spots in medieval abbeys have been systematically searched. That means 85% of these time capsules, and whatever they contain, remain untouched. The real game changer lies in the manuscripts we know existed but have never recovered. Take Aristotle's lost dialogues, texts referenced by ancient writers but vanished since the fall of Rome. Scholars have traced references to his missing works on comedy, rhetoric, and even early biology, with medieval catalogues from Cluny and Monte Cassino listing titles that don't match any known surviving copies. Then there's the legendary Christian text The Shepherd of Hermas, once considered scripture by early church fathers but dropped from the biblical canon by the 4th century. Fragments exist, but a complete copy, possibly hidden during theological purges, could reshape our understanding of early Christianity. The fact that these works survived long enough to be catalogued in abbey inventories suggests they might still be out there, waiting for the right combination of technology and luck to bring them back into the light. Technology is rewriting the rules of discovery. Multispectral imaging can now detect erased texts beneath later writings without damaging fragile parchment. At the Abbey of St. Gall, researchers recently uncovered a 9th century star chart hidden beneath a liturgical calendar, its constellations matching descriptions from a lost Ptolemaic treatise. Drones equipped with thermal cameras are scanning remote monastic ruins in the Scottish Highlands, identifying temperature variations that signal hollow chambers. Even artificial intelligence plays a role. Algorithms trained on medieval handwriting styles can reconstruct fragmented texts with startling accuracy, piecing together sentences from charred scraps previously deemed unreadable. The next breakthrough might not come from a dramatic excavation, but from a grad student running old scans through a new software filter and spotting something everyone else missed. But the most exciting prospects lie in the unexpected. When workers renovating a Spanish convent in 2018 knocked through a wall, they found not gold or jewels, but a cache of Mozarabic liturgical texts from the 10th century, complete with musical notation that predates Gregorian chant by generations. Similarly, a routine plumbing repair at a French abbey in 2020 exposed a lead box containing letters between Elena of Aquitaine and Thomas Becket, their wax seals intact. These weren't planned discoveries, they were happy accidents proving that history's greatest finds often come when we're not even looking. The question isn't just what we'll find, but how these discoveries could rewrite history. A single recovered manuscript might settle debates about medieval medicine, prove the existence of unknown philosophical schools, or reveal suppressed voices, like the rumored Gospel of Mary, some believe still lies hidden beneath an Austrian abbey's foundations. Every undiscovered library is a potential Pandora's box of ideas, waiting to challenge our assumptions about the past. And with each passing year, as technology erodes the barriers between us and these hidden troves, we inch closer to unlocking secrets that could redefine entire fields of study. The monks who buried these texts knew their value would outlast the centuries. They just might not have guessed how explosively their long-guarded truths could reshape the world when finally set free. History often remembers kings and conquerors, but the real heroes of hidden libraries were the ordinary men and women who became extraordinary through their quiet acts of defiance. Picture Brother Alcuin of York in the late 8th century, a scholar so devoted to preserving knowledge that he reportedly sewed rare manuscripts into his cloak's lining while fleeing Viking raids. When longships appeared on the horizon, he didn't grab gold or relics, he ran to the scriptorium, selecting which texts to save based on their irreplaceability. Centuries later, radiocarbon dating would prove one of those smuggled pages contained the only surviving fragment of a lost Tacitus history. Its survival owed entirely to a monk's split-second decision under fire. These guardians operated with shrewd pragmatism. At Clairvaux Abbey during the Albigensian Crusade, Abbot Bernard kept 2 sets of records: orthodox texts for inspectors and forbidden works hidden in wine casks buried beneath the cellar. His journal reveals the stress of this double life. "I prayed daily for the strength to lie with a pure heart." He confessed, believing deception was justified to protect wisdom future generations might need. Similarly, when Spanish inquisitors demanded the surrender of Arabic medical texts at Montserrat, Sister Teresa de Avila orchestrated an elaborate ruse. She replaced the manuscript's covers with approved devotional titles, knowing inspectors rarely read past the first page. Her marginal note, discovered centuries later, reads simply, "God forgive my hands for writing lies, but not my heart for preserving truth." The risks were heartbreakingly real. In 1234, Bavarian scribe Brother Henry was caught smuggling Waldensian Bibles, vernacular translations the church had banned. His trial records survive, detailing how he'd hidden the contraband books inside hollowed-out loaves of bread delivered to peasant communities. When interrogators demanded he name accomplices, Henry chose torture over betrayal. His final written words, scratched on a prison wall with a fingernail, were psalm verses about light overcoming darkness. Yet his sacrifice wasn't in vain. Decades later, reformers would use those same underground Bibles as templates for mass-printed translations that democratized Scripture. Women played equally crucial but often overlooked roles. At Barking Abbey near London, Abbess Hildolith supervised the copying of over 200 manuscripts during the 9th century Viking invasions. Her innovation, training nuns to write in minuscule script, allowing more text to fit on scarce parchment. When Danish forces burned neighboring monasteries, Hildolith organized nighttime evacuation parties, floating chests of books down the Thames to safety on makeshift rafts. Her ledgers, preserved in the British Library, show meticulous records of which texts were saved, including the only surviving copy of Bede's Life of Cuthbert, now considered a cornerstone of Anglo-Saxon history. The most poignant stories emerge from personal effects discovered in hidden chambers. In 2011, conservators working on the Geniza manuscripts in Cairo found a child's practice alphabet sheet tucked between pages of Maimonides' philosophical works. The back bore a note in shaky Hebrew. "My daughter Judith learned her letters here today, though the Sultan's men patrol outside." This fragile scrap, likely hidden by a Jewish scholar during persecution, reminds us that preserving knowledge wasn't just about grand ideals. It was about ensuring children like Judith would inherit a world where learning still had meaning. These individuals weren't saints or scholars by birth. They became heroes through daily choices. The cook who diverted broth grease to make lamp fuel for nighttime copying. The stable boy who memorized patrol schedules to warn scribes. The noblewoman who donated her dowry jewels to buy parchment instead. Their collective actions created an unbroken chain of transmission, linking ancient thinkers to modern minds across what should have been insurmountable barriers of time and tyranny. When we hold a medieval manuscript today, we're not just touching parchment, we're touching the courage of everyone who refused to let that page disappear. The windswept cliffs of Skellig Michael rise violently from the Atlantic, where 6th century Irish monks built stone beehive huts clinging to the rock like barnacles. Here, in one of Europe's most inhospitable outposts, they hollowed out chambers beneath their chapels, not for treasure, but for books. When Viking longships appeared on the horizon, brothers would scramble down treacherous paths to secret sea caves, their arms laden with illuminated gospels and Latin classics. What's astonishing isn't just their desperation, but their foresight. They intentionally chose an island so remote that even the tides conspired to protect their hoard. Fast forward 1,500 years, and NASA astronauts training on Skellig's vertigo-inducing slopes still stumble upon manuscript fragments wedged between stones, preserved by salt air in defiance of time. Half a world away in the highlands of Ethiopia, monks at Lake Tonna's island monasteries took protection to even greater extremes. They carved entire libraries directly into volcanic rock, their shelves invisible from the outside. To access these subterranean vaults, one had to lower themselves through narrow shafts using braided leather ropes, a deliberate design ensuring only the initiated could enter. The most precious texts, like the Kebra Nagast chronicling the Solomonic dynasty's divine origins, were sealed in hollowed-out wooden cases smeared with beeswax and buried beneath church altars. When Italian forces invaded in the 1930s, they ransacked the surface buildings but never suspected the real treasures lay under their boots. These parallels reveal something profound. From the foggy Celtic fringe to the sweltering Horn of Africa, the tactics of preservation were eerily similar. Irish scribes and Ethiopian clerics, separated by continents and centuries, both used deception and geology as allies. The Irish disguised book chests as fishing nets drying on rocks, while Ethiopian monks trained parrots to mimic alarm calls when soldiers approached. Both cultures embedded protective prayers into the very parchment. Irish manuscripts feature curses promising leprosy to thieves, while Ethiopian colophons invoke the Archangel Michael to blind the eyes of invaders. This wasn't coincidence, it was the emergence of a universal playbook for safeguarding knowledge against tyranny. The connections run deeper than method, they're material. Carbon dating has proven some vellum in Ethiopian codices originated from Irish caves, suggesting trade routes linking these distant scriptoriums. Even more telling are the textual echoes. A 9th century Irish manuscript of John's Gospel recently revealed marginalia in Ethiopia's liturgical language, proving scribes from both traditions were consulting each other's work. Some scholars now believe Coptic monks fleeing Arab conquests may have carried preservation techniques from Egypt to Ireland via Mediterranean trade networks, creating an underground railroad of ideas centuries before the Silk Road flourished. What unites these scattered sanctuaries isn't just their secrecy, but their shared understanding of knowledge as something fragile yet indestructible. The monks of Skellig Michael could have never met the clerics of Lake Tonna, yet they were comrades in an unspoken fellowship, guardians at outposts of a global resistance against oblivion. Their legacy whispers a radical truth. When you bury a book to save it, you're not hiding knowledge from the world. You're planting it like a seed, trusting that someday someone worthy will know where to dig. The strategies medieval monks used to protect their hidden libraries feel eerily familiar in today's digital landscape. Those monks encrypting controversial texts by writing them in obscure dialects or ciphers were practicing an early form of data security, not so different from the algorithms that now scramble our online communications. Their redundancy systems, where identical manuscripts were secretly copied and stored in multiple abbeys, mirror today's distributed cloud storage networks designed to survive server failures. Even their decentralized approach, scattering fragments of knowledge across remote monasteries, anticipates blockchain technology's promise of tamper-proof records spread across countless nodes. The parallels aren't coincidental. They reveal universal truths about safeguarding ideas in hostile environments. Consider how medieval scribes dealt with misinformation. When corrupt rulers rewrote histories to suit their narratives, monks like those at Fulda Abbey maintained parallel chronicles, one for public shelves praising the king, another hidden beneath the floorboards recording famine and corruption. Today, initiatives like the Wayback Machine and decentralized wikis serve a similar purpose, preserving snapshots of truth as governments and corporations alter digital records. The monks' practice of embedding verification clues, watermarks in parchment, chemical signatures in ink, finds its modern equivalent in digital authentication protocols and cryptographic hashing. Both eras share a core insight: trust requires proof, and proof demands creative solutions when authority can't be trusted. The most striking lesson lies in their long-term thinking. Medieval librarians didn't just hide books for their own generation. They anticipated future threats we can now see with hindsight. They lined chests with lead against fire, treated parchment with tannins to repel insects, even designed ventilation systems to combat humidity, all to outlast wars, climate shifts, and ideological purges. Modern archivists face eerily similar challenges: how to ensure today's PDFs remain readable in 500 years, how to shield servers from both cyber attacks and solar flares, how to preserve context so future historians understand our social media fragments. The monks' greatest innovation wasn't any single technique, but their mindset. Preservation isn't passive storage, but active defense against the unknown. Yet their failures are just as instructive. For every successfully hidden manuscript, countless others crumbled because someone forgot to recopy them before the ink faded, or chose the wrong hiding place in a flood-prone crypt. Today's digital dark age, where file formats obsolesce and platforms vanish overnight, repeats these mistakes at scale. The monk's experience whispers a warning: no single preservation method is foolproof. Their surviving texts often endured through sheer luck: a carpenter missing a hollow wall, a fire stopping just shy of a trapdoor. Our reliance on fragile technologies like magnetic tape and proprietary software risks leaving future generations with more gaps than answers. What endures is their philosophy. Those monks understood that knowledge isn't truly safe until it's both protected and usable, hence their painstaking efforts to annotate texts for future readers, translating obsolete terms or adding marginal guides. Modern digital preservation grapples with the same balance, ensuring files aren't just stored but remain interpretable as languages evolve and cultural references fade. The real legacy of those hidden libraries isn't in the stones or the parchment, but in the timeless truth they embody. Preserving ideas requires equal parts cunning, courage, and faith that someone someday will care enough to look. The secret libraries beneath Abbey floors are more than historical curiosities. They are monuments to humanity's enduring thirst for knowledge. Think about the sheer determination it took to safeguard ideas against the tides of war, censorship, and time itself. These hidden chambers weren't just storage spaces. They were acts of faith that future generations would value what the present sought to destroy. Every manuscript rescued from oblivion, every text copied by candlelight, represents a thread in the fragile tapestry of human understanding, woven across centuries by hands we'll never know. What's truly remarkable is how these libraries mirror our own era's struggles. The monks who bricked up controversial texts beneath their chapels weren't so different from modern archivists racing to digitize endangered languages or activists preserving censored journalism in blockchain ledgers. The tools have changed, but the mission remains the same: to ensure that no idea, no matter how inconvenient, disappears forever. Consider the irony. Today's digital archives face threats medieval scribes could never have imagined: server crashes, format obsolescence, even solar flares that could wipe out hard drives. Yet our solutions, distributed backups, open source formats, echo their ancient wisdom of scattering copies to outlast disaster. The legacy of these hidden libraries challenges us to look beyond the present moment. When a monk at Bobbio Abbey tucked Lucretius' radical atomic theories beneath the floor, he couldn't have known they'd inspire Renaissance thinkers centuries later. What fragments of today's knowledge, currently dismissed, suppressed, or overlooked, might hold the keys to tomorrow's breakthroughs? The climate research buried by corporate interests, the marginalized voices excluded from algorithms, the abandoned scientific studies that don't fit prevailing narratives. These are our era's hidden libraries, waiting for their moment of rediscovery. As the last flickering candle in a medieval scriptorium casts long shadows, it leaves us with a question both simple and profound: what will we choose to protect? The monks didn't preserve knowledge because it was safe or popular. They saved it because it mattered. In an age of information overload, where content vanishes as quickly as it appears, their example reminds us that preservation is an act of defiance against forgetfulness. So the next time you walk past an old building, remember, the real treasures might not be in plain sight, but hidden just beneath the surface, whispering across time to those willing to listen. If this journey through the shadows of history has sparked your curiosity, join the conversation below. Your thoughts might just inspire the next great discovery. After all, every hidden library began with someone daring to ask, what if?